everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. I am here with my liquid courage and today we are going to talk about how I rate my books. I know that rating can be so subjective and my favorite book might be your least favorite book, or your least favorite book might be my favorite book. But since I'm new here, I really just wanted to talk a little bit more about the thought process that goes behind how I rate all of my books and share some examples of each rating and why I rated them. And honestly, this is just a little bit of an excuse to talk a little bit more about some books that I've read recently that I might not get a chance to talk about otherwise. We will kick it right off with our 1-star ratings. I honestly don't use the 1-star rating very much. Anybody that knows me knows that it's a very annoying thing that I do where I could hate a book and I have the hardest time putting it down. I cannot DNF a book once I get started. And since it usually takes me a little bit to really understand whether or not I'm really going to like a book or not, then at that point I'm too invested. So my 1-star ratings are usually reserved for books that are genuinely, truly terrible, like books that shouldn't even exist but that I read for some reason. And 2, I mostly use the 1-star rating as a spite rating. I actually don't have many things rated as a 1-star on Goodreads. I rated Twilight as a 1-star, but I think that might have just been like freshman college student me being like, fuck Twilight. I don't trust that rating. I also gave Frankenstein by Shelley a 1-star, and I honestly don't even think that I finished reading that in college, but it definitely probably just hit me at the wrong time. And it is a book that I would love to reread soon, especially since I've heard really good things about it. But the one deserving book of a 1-star rating on my Goodreads is I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell by What's-His-Face. I'm not even going to say his name because I don't think anybody cares or wants to read I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. It's douche fiction. My brother borrowed it to me when he was like in high school. He thought it was really funny, and it is like peak white male humor, which is like almost always a 1-star for me. 2-star ratings for me, I think, are probably what a lot of people use the 1-star rating for. If I read a book to the end, even if I read it, I feel like I've got to give it 2 stars because at that point there is something keeping me from like chucking it out the window right away. And like I did finish it, so it's not the worst book of all time. Usually a 2-star book I don't recommend to anybody. The negatives outweigh the positives by a landslide, and just like whenever I think of a 2-star book, I am instantly kind of annoyed. If I Disappear by Eliza Jane Brazier was a 2-star for me. This is about a true crime podcast obsessed woman whose favorite podcast host goes missing. And she thinks that the best thing for her to do is to track down her podcast host, find out what happened to her, and see if maybe possibly she has also become a victim. So she moves to this farm in the middle of California. She's kind of like integrating herself with this podcast host family. She's asking a lot of questions, and it was just not good. Like a lot more questions came up than answers. Lots of really confusing motives. My friends and I actually buddy read this together during the pandemic, and half of our book discussion was kind of creating alternative endings or ways that this book should have gone, which is definitely, 2-star territory for me when you start rewriting the book yourself. A surprising 2-star for me was Difficult Women by Roxanne Gay. I usually love every single thing that Roxanne Gay writes, but this was not a hit for me. I think some people typically read short stories, like read a story here, read something else, come back for another story. I like to just shotgun them all, and as a collection, this book just felt a little one note. I think that there are so many ways in which women are difficult and complex creatures, and it seemed like all of the women had roughly like the same issues or the same sorts of things that they were grappling with. There are multiple sets of twins in the story, and so it kind of just felt like she was taking a character here, changing the name, and then like connecting them with a different character. And I just didn't like it, but literally anything else she likes, I'm a fan of. And my most recent 2-star rating, which was a huge Bummertown, USA for me, was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is probably one of my favorite movies. I've seen it so many times. I have heard that Quentin Tarantino has a 23-hour like director's cut of this movie, and so I think that this book was just like another like into that world. And you could definitely tell that he is a script writer versus a novel writer. A lot of the action in this story was very much like they laughed, she entered, like very stage sort of directions. And it was almost as if he had taken everything interesting about the movie and took it out of the book and took everything boring from the movie and put it into the book. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the movie, is about Rick Dalton, who is an aging, kind of falling out of popularity Western star, and his stunt double, Cliff Booth. And it's sort of how Rick is trying to get back into the movie business. Of course, Cliff, he kind of has a reputation for maybe possibly murdering his wife and just being kind of crazy. And then Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate move in next door. And so throughout the movie, there are some brushes with the Manson family, and it all builds to this amazing finale in the movie. In the book, we have the same characters, but that amazing finale never makes it on the page. So then you're kind of just wondering why like the Manson family is there, why like Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate are there. Like none of it pulls it together. There are like many chapters dedicated to the Lancer TV show that Rick Dalton gets booked on, and it just didn't mean anything in the context of the novel, and it was just such a bummer. Definitely a 2-star. 3 stars, of course, I think are the same for everybody. These are just fine. Very middle of the road. There's nothing that like offended me enough to make it a 2-star book, but there's also not enough that excited me to make it a 4 or 5-star book. Typically what happens in 3-star books for me is that the story is amazing, but the writing is not my favorite thing, or the writing is incredible, but the story just falls a little bit flat for me. A few examples of a 3-star book for me would be Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. I would also include the Final Girls support group in here as well. Grady Hendrix is complicated. I love campy, sort of over-the-top horror movies, but on the page it just doesn't work for me the same way. And Grady Hendrix's writing is not funny and over the top enough to go into full camp like love it territory, and it's also just not scary enough for it to be some of my favorite horror writing. Horror Store specifically is about a group of people working the overnight shift at an IKEA like store, and once everybody leaves for the day, weird shit starts happening. There is ghosts, there are some possessions, it's very gory and strange. Definitely fun to read, but it's just another example of a recent 3-star for me was Death in Her Hands by Oteza Mashbay. I usually love Oteza Mashbay's writing. I think that she has this amazing dryness to her voice. She is very strange. She's not afraid to go to weird, gritty places. And the fact that I'm not remembering much about this book should tell you why it's a 3-star. When I was starting to feel a little disheartened by how this book was turning out, I turned to Goodreads to see if anybody else was feeling the same way as me, and a couple other reviewers said that Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead was a better rendition of a similar story, and I would agree. Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danler, also a 3-star book for me. I actually love Stephanie Danler's writing. I think that she also has incredible taste in books. I am constantly like screenshotting her stories on Instagram for recommendations. Sweet Bitter is written flawlessly. It captures a woman who is just moving to New York City. She gets a job at a fine dining restaurant, and it kind of becomes a slice of life of her making it in New York City, being broke, hanging out with the rest of the staff, and creating these friendships with them. I thought it really captured that like a messy, like early 20s time in your life. It was just the characters didn't develop enough for me. Their relationships were so like flat or one-sided that is what ended up making it a 3-star instead of a 4, or the writing could have made it a 5, but just the characters fell flat. 4-star books for me are almost perfect. They are so close. There's just usually one thing that sticks out to me. So in my Stephen King haul, I mentioned that 11/22/63 is a favorite for me, but there's a terrible line of dialogue in there. And since that sticks in my mind along with all of the other amazing things, that's what keeps it from being a 5-star read for me. A lot of 4-star books for me are so great. I recommend them a ton. I would love to reread a lot of them. There's just sometimes a little bit of something holding me back. Great example of a 4-star is Cultish by Amanda Montel. This is a nonfiction book about the language of cults, and so it's how cult leaders pull in their recruits and what makes people want to join and what makes them want to stay. She also talks a lot about some more modern day cults like Soul Cycle or MLMs. She also gets into the Church of Scientology and Jim Jones. So she has like those bigger cults mentioned, and then some of the ones that you wouldn't necessarily think of cults until you see how she breaks it down in her book. It's written in such an easy, accessible way. She has such a fun voice. This is definitely not one of those dry nonfiction reads. The reason that it's a 4-star instead of a 5 for me, a little bit selfish. I just wish there was so much more. This is such a fascinating subject for me that I could read 6 volumes of this and still be left wanting more. And I think that because there is such a wealth of material out there in examining cults and the language of them, I kind of wish she had reached a little bit further with this book, but it was still fantastic. Love it so much. Everybody should read it. And also listen to her podcast, Sounds Like a Cult Pod. The Stand by Stephen King is also a 4-star for me. Also in my Stephen King haul, I did mention that this is a favorite of mine, and to not be deterred by the length, it is still a favorite, but there are some parts that are more exciting than others. So we have this really exciting first half of the book where society is collapsing. People are left scrambling and trying to figure out what to do in the wake of this highly deadly infectious disease sweeping across the United States. So then the first half, super exciting, full of action, full of like lots of creepy little things as we get to know the characters and how they're coming together. The second half is when they start to sort of find their groups, things are coming up again, and that part just maybe is a little bit more boring. Still super fun to read, but the book is a little bit imbalanced in that way, so that is why it is a 4-star for me. Most excitingly are the 5-star books. I am pretty sparing with how often I use the 5-star rating. I generally tend to reserve these for books that like absolutely made my heart so happy and that I just want to read over and over and over again. Sometimes 5-star books for me are not fully perfect. Sometimes maybe there's some weird things with the writing, or sometimes there's like a plot hole or something that doesn't fully get paved over. But when I finish a 5-star book, those little imperfections are the last thing on my mind, and all I'm thinking about when I turn the last page is how absolutely in love with that story I was. I am missing the book itself. It is in the time capsule that is the desk in my office that I haven't been to for 2 years. But a 5-star for me was Calypso by David Sedaris. This is his most recent essay collection besides like the diary entry books that have been coming. I just thought every essay in this collection was so funny, so touching. There's a lot of heart in here, but also so much humor. Like, there is poop jokes in here, along with family coming together as their father ages or after their sister passes away. So he really does a great job at mixing these things that start happening as you get older and what that does to your family dynamic. Both of Carmen Maria Machado's books are 5 stars for me, 100%. In the Dream House is her memoir about surviving an abusive relationship. Each chapter is kind of told in a different form. So it'll be in the Dream House as a sci-fi novel, or in the Dream House as a horror movie. And so she looks at her relationship through all of these different lenses. It is so heartbreaking, but so beautifully written and just done in a way that I've never seen before. And Her Body and Other Parties is her short story collection. Like I mentioned earlier, I do tend to just shotgun story collections and read them all in a row. And in this case, there was no problems. Every single story is an absolute banger. I didn't feel like I was reading the same story over and over again. They're super fresh, super creepy, super feminist and queer, and just so creepy that this collection was the first thing I read from her. And now she's an insta-buy author for me for sure. Some of my other favorite 5-star reads are very retro, but we do have Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. This is not peak literature. I think this, when it came out, it was definitely sort of like a guilty pleasure, like trashy read. And it is about 3 women in New York City. They're all trying to find their way to fame, and they take these different routes. They are double crossing each other. Their men are testing their confidence and testing their faith. And it is just so juicy and so engaging and fun to read. And it is a little bit of a mess, but when you finish reading it, you will hate men, also hate everyone else in your life. You will be heartbroken. You will want to know what happens to these women after the story happens. I just really love the time period of this story and all of the little dramas that start to unfold as well. And we also have Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. This is one of my personal favorite horror movies about a woman and her husband who move into this very old apartment building, and her friend says that it is a cursed place full of bad vibes, and things start to get a little bit, suspicious when their neighbors take an extremely special interest in her and her pregnancy once her and her husband conceive. If you like the movie, you will of course absolutely love the book. They're very similar. I personally think that Ira Levin was a writer ahead of his time. He really explores reasons why women can't trust men like gaslighting their wives, how women know exactly what is right for them and what is right for their bodies and their babies, but people are constantly undermining that and taking advantage of them. So this one is also fantastic. Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo, also a vintage favorite of mine. I had to read this in college and I was obsessed. It is about a man who is waking up after being severely injured in World War One, and he is kind of piecing together his injuries, which are extremely severe. He's extremely locked in, essentially. He has no way of communicating, he has no way of moving, and so it is a very painstaking, uncomfortable book to read, as he has an itch that he can't scratch. It is very stream of conscious in here. There's not a lot of punctuation. You're really just floating along in his brain space as he is thinking back to what got him into this horrifying situation. We have Just Kids by Patti Smith. This book honestly changed my life. Patti Smith is the quote-unquote godmother of punk rock. She's an absolute baddie. Please listen to her music. And this story chronicles her time moving to New York in the 60s, trying to make it as an artist, as a musician. Also a really detailed account of her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe. I just love this book so much. It really gets into how scrappy she is and how resourceful she was. And it was just so inspiring for me as a young little college student in art school, reading about somebody so dedicated to making a life out of art. And that is really what made me change my major to fiction writing at the time. This book is definitely up there as one of the most treasured books for me, also something I would love to reread soon. And since I was flipping through, I just wanted to read one of the lines that I had underlined many moons ago when I read this for the first time. I immersed myself in books and rock and roll, the adolescent salvation of 1961. Just fantastic. One of my most recent 5-star books was Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. This is just one of the best books I have ever read, and there's just a combination of things that were happening for this book to make it so perfect for me. The common theme with my 5-star books is that it's something that I've never read anything like it before, and it also has something to say, and Night Bitch is definitely like peak holder of both of those qualities for me. Night Bitch is the story about a woman who left her job as an artist after the birth of her son so that she could become a stay-at-home mom. Her husband is almost always working, he's never around. She's definitely like stuck in that monotony of caring for a young child. And then one day she wakes up and she thinks she's turning into a dog. She has sharper, longer teeth. She has a patch of fur. She's growing a tail. This book is really fun if you want to read it literally and take everything that's happening for being reality. But it's also very easy to see that her becoming a dog is sort of a symbol for her coming back to art. So her becoming a dog, and this dog character of hers is what she calls a Night Bitch. That is really her entering into that phase of getting back into making art and really connecting deeply with herself. And I love the message there, where there is this sort of like patriarchal bullshit idea that a woman cannot serve herself while also serving her child. And I think it's really easy for moms especially to get stuck in that trap. As she is becoming this dog, she also finds herself becoming a better mom. She's playing with her son. Her son loves playing dog with her and pretending to like eat like a dog and playing like a dog. And she also finds that other kids at the playground are kind of jealous of their play style and want to join in as well. And when she's in her human form, she's encountering these other women who she thinks are sort of like those glossy, perfect moms, you know, the ones that are always well put together. They always remember snacks for story time at the library. They are just born to be mothers, and so they seem so perfect and comfortable to her. Meanwhile, she's like turning into this dog. But she starts to realize that these other women are also dogs too. And also just seeing that even though these women seem perfect, or perhaps the better word would be that these moms seem a little chooky, but she starts to recognize them as dogs too, which is just showing that even if these women have different interests than her, they still have these passions and these things that are connecting to outside of caring for their child. I love the message in this book. I love that it is like weird and gross and gory and bloody, and honestly like giving birth is like that too, and motherhood in general. And so I love how she really amplifies how fucking badass women are. She really gives women so much credit for what our bodies go through, whether or not we give birth, what the process of birth is like, and how absolutely strong women are. There are so many beautiful quotes in here about how have mothers not been outlawed yet because we are so tough and so strong. How many women have like put their greatness on the back burner for the sake of like men and their children, and how many women like stifled it so deeply that they never gave themselves a chance to be great while they were helping those around them become great instead. Absolutely stunning book. I read it when I was 2 months postpartum, and it was exactly what I needed to read as someone who hasn't done the most writing since my son was born, and even while I was pregnant. Reading the story of her transformation, of that journey back to art, but also just celebrating the strength and grit of women. Absolutely perfect book to me. I am so sad that I read it as a digital book from the library. I need to get my own copy as soon as possible, and it will absolutely be something that I reread along with these other 5-star books. That is how I rate my books. That is everything that is floating around in this little brain of mine while I am trying to figure out how to rate my recent reads. I hope that this was insightful. I had so much fun just going through some of my favorite books with you and having a chance to talk about them. A lot of these 5 stars we will be seeing again soon. If you are new here, please be sure to like this video, subscribe, come along for this journey with me. I am still figuring out how to do this YouTube thing. I am currently filming a vlog which should go up probably a few days after this, and I have a lot more fun ideas coming up too, so please be sure to join in and leave a comment below telling me what is most important to you when you write a book. Do you go based on story? Do you go based on the writing? Or do you just go off of overall vibes? Like, you liked it, it's a 5. You didn't, it's a 1. I would love to hear how you rate as well. Thank you guys so much for watching.